a great day, I'm feeling good. Oh, the possibilities of what I could.
What happens when a blind man, a woman of color, and a child of immigrants get together to discuss how diversity, equity, and inclusion can impact businesses?
I'm moving fast. Oh, I'm optimistic.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Choose Inclusion podcast. I'm Yubi, and I am the Latino white guy of the group.
I'm Nina. I am the woman of color in the group.
And I'm Mike. I'm the blind guy.
Welcome back. So today we're talking about the interview process. I think we can all agree that the interview process is the first thing, right, that people, the first way that people experience an organization. And so, I don't know about you all, but I've really seen a lot of ups and downs in the interview process with all the companies that we've worked with, and it's hard, and especially in a day and age when Nina, we were just talking about how technology is really reshaping everything from our country, our government, but everything. And I think companies, there's so much technology out there from an HR perspective that companies feel like, oh, I can just plug it in and it'll do what we need.
It'll fix everything if we just use the technology.
Exactly. And honestly, in my opinion, it's just more of a postponement or a displacement of bias, for example,
right,
rather than what a lot of them claim to do is remove bias.
Yeah, and I think it's so important we talk about the interview process because that experience that candidates have when they're there will make or break whether they join a company or not. And if you think about candidates from underrepresented groups, you could be potentially losing a lot of opportunities for talent because you're not recognizing the bias that you're bringing, or you're not recognizing how you could be causing harm during that interview. And I found this stat on the internet, 83% of talent say a negative interview experience can change their mind about a role or company they once liked, while 87% of talent say a positive interview experience can change their mind about the role or company they once doubted. And that's a really powerful statistic. So it says a lot about what are you doing to make your interview process inclusive? Because otherwise, there's some pretty negative consequences if you're not really thinking about that.
Without a doubt, and without your the human factor, however, the organizations to make quick fixes and all that sort of thing, you understand the logic behind leveraging technology as much as they can to at least address what they know as there's a flaw in the human interaction. So they're leveraging technology. I believe that the intent is good and positive. However, it's not just okay, poof, the technology fixes all of it.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of these technology companies, frankly, they don't want to be consulting companies, mm-hmm, right? They just want to sell the technology and move on. And right, so there's an aspect of training organizations, training people involved in the interview process on how to use it effectively and use it effectively for your company. I think that a lot of companies fail to truly understand just even their own culture, even their what makes someone successful here as opposed to company B down the street. And without that knowledge, you're kind of just shooting in the dark.
Yeah, so what are your guys' thoughts on, because I've been spending some time thinking about this, what are your guys' thoughts on what are the don'ts? What are the things that are no-nos that you should do when you're thinking about creating an inclusive interview process? What are the big pitfalls and mistakes that a company could make when they're I want to make an inclusive interview process and this is what we're going to do?
Well, I think for me to think that there's an end state. I believe that it needs to be reviewed in a very agile fashion. So no different than coming from the tech space. Your requirements are fluid, and you need to recognize that in the human interaction component, that you need to be willing to take a deep dive look in an agile approach to what is working and what is not working. So for me, to think that like, oh, okay, we've achieved this. I believe that just that idea of like, oh no, like our interview process is a done state is a big no-no.
Yeah, it's like UX design. You're constantly iterating.
Right.
You got to iterate, and as the world changes, you have to iterate with it.
Yeah, and organizations that I believe that have that approach, that fluid approach, is saying, okay, so like, can we just agree that there is such a thing as ageism on both sides of the spectrum, right? Whether it's a boomer and or a Gen Zer, right? Like there's ageism throughout. It's fraught within our society. Like we see it all the time. And so, whether or not in sexism, right, racism, people with disabilities, like those kind of isms are for real. And to take an iterative approach and say, okay, well, what can we do to promote the assets from these isms versus just focusing on that? Like to me, there's and there's no way to like. I've yet to see training that addresses all of that. I've yet to see that, even with all the amazing training that all three of us have collectively seen. Yeah. I've yet to see that end state. Like we've seen piece parts that really address them really well. However, we all have biases. We do. Even me not from a vision perspective, but from an audio perspective. So how do you teach for that?
Yeah. Well, and I think the big one, kind of a step before what you're talking about, Mike, is a big don't is not even having like a formalized interview process in place, right? Just kind of letting, either the recruiting team or letting all the hiring managers off on their own to come up with their own questions, to come up with their own process. The problem there is now you have a bunch of people helping to build the talent assets of the organization who are all telling different stories, all setting different expectations, all asking crazy questions like, what kitchen utensil would you be and why?
Right.
What are you getting out of that? I don't understand. Like, it blows my mind. Right. And so, but if you just unleash that freedom and you don't have a formalized, standardized process in place, then let's say you're successful in hiring half of those people into the organization. Now you have all these people who have a different expectation of what this company is and what their role is going to be in that company.
Yeah.
And so they leave.
Yeah, actually, I was meeting with a woman of color earlier this week who, has done project management for many years and is looking to pivot into the tech sector and to start doing product management. And, as she's talking to these tech companies, one of the words that she keeps on hearing is culture fit. And she's like, how do you even define culture fit? And I said, you don't. It is a meaningless term that definitely leads to discrimination, because if you're only looking for people that you have that gut feeling like, I like them, I can see myself working with them, and that's how you're evaluating, who's a good candidate and who isn't, like, of course you're just going to end up with like all the same people with the same thoughts and the same skills and the same boring attitudes about how to innovate at your company. And so I think without that process, you end up with people saying, oh yeah, culture fit, that's what we're looking for. And it's a meaningless term.
Well, it's so subjective, right? To think that culture fit is, so then you start looking, okay, well then, so hopefully culture is defined somewhat on their website, like, okay, what are your values? So then let's start looking at something, but we have a value of we want to have fun. Okay, well, is your fun? Let's define your fun. Like, so does fun mean drinking beer and going to a ball game? So you start thinking of those, and those are arbitrary.
Yeah.
Like, so even if you're building culture off of something that's on your website, which is your hopefully your value statements, if they've gone to that level of defining culture,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like the word values. I think that's really important. That I would say that culture and values are two different things. And that when you're, saying, a lot of companies will talk about their values, and they will say early on, here are the values of our company. And I think if you are really clear about that and you are saying that with every single person in the interview process, because you've created a process, and a clear set of communication guidelines and training for every single person that's going to be doing an interview on how do you train. I think that's another key element that we're not really talking about a lot, is like the fact that you should be training people how to do interviews. We just kind of assume that, like, well, if you can do your job well, then you're fully capable of interviewing well.
Right.
And that's just not true at all. It's a different skill set.
How many people are in management who are not really, adept at managing in general, but they were the most qualified from a technical perspective. So obviously they're really good at tech. So let's put them into a leadership position.
Right.
Exactly.
How pervasive is that?
Right.
Oh, all
exactly.
over.
And
Well, yeah.
yeah, it's a missing opportunity again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, and I think, I agree with you, Nina, on the values versus culture. I mean, to me, culture, every department, even every team has their own culture,
Yeah.
right? Like that's their story. So to say culture fit, okay, well, let's define that for the team that, this person is potentially going to hire into, because it's different than the team across the street or down the hall or whatever. It's different from IT to sales to finance. But values, there absolutely could be a shared valued system within an organization that you can define, and every hiring manager better know what that story is.
Yeah.
And I think there's a problem that we've seen a lot where the people who are responsible for hiring have no clear understanding from their supervisors and the executive team up above of what any of this means. So there's a fear factor, and then what does your brain do in that scenario? It just makes up stories. So now I'm giving candidates, again, wrong information or false information. If you don't have a work from home policy, don't tell a candidate that we can talk about that after you get hired.
Right.
There's no work from home policy. Like,
Right.
own it.
Right.
Okay, so on the flip side, so you asked what are the big no-nos during the interview process, right?
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask both of you. So for our listeners, give me a single item that people can do that's actionable to make their interview process more inclusive.
Pay people for their time for the interview. So this is something that is, I think, not really talked about. I only heard about this recently, where I was talking to a company that for their developer time, after the developers kind of passed a certain number round of interviews and they're down to kind of the place where they're going to go into the in-depth technical interview, where they're going to be pair programming for 4 hours, they pay the interviewee for their time for those 4 hours, and they pay them normal contractor rates for that. And what they found was that just creates a great first impression. That creates candidates who are offered that job are much more likely to not only take the job, but stay at the job much longer, because you as a company are already telling people, we value your time. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing you're telling a candidate is like, we actually value your time. And that's an incredible way to create an inclusive process. And you would be on the cutting edge if your company starts doing that, because the company I talk to, without a doubt, is on the cutting edge of that.
Love it.
That's
Ubaldo, so much recruiting that you do at the executive level. What's the one thing that you help organizations understand when it comes to hiring from an inclusive mindset?
So I think the biggest thing for us is that authenticity and clarity of what you're looking for in the role and why this role is so important to your organization. What is the impact that this role is going to have on your company? I think, job descriptions are a dime a dozen, right? You can go, like we were doing a CEO search. You can go find a CEO job description, 100 of them, and they pretty much all read the same. Like if you're a CEO or you're a leader, you kind of know what that means, or you should, right? And so to actually apply for that role. But the next level for organizations is being very authentic and clear about exactly the kind of person you're looking for. You're not looking for every CEO. You're looking for a very specific person who aligns with the values of the organization, who's going to come in and continue to take care and grow the culture that already exists there, and who matches who matches the impact that they're looking for. So that's the biggest thing. You've got to start there, and you've got to start with having everybody on board with that. There's if you look at a board or an executive team, there's the possibility that they all have different ideas of what they want from a new CEO or any leadership role in the organization. You have to get them all on the same page before you can even begin to go look for candidates for that role.
Yeah.
Well, we'll do another episode on whether or not just because you're a C-suite or VP that you also are a leader. That's a topic of another day. However, that'll get a little controversial there. So
No, that's good. Well, what's your biggest no? I mean, so from your perspective, you're really working with organizations to help them find blind and visually impaired people to join their team.
The greater people with disabilities, right? And so
Yes.
both of you know, like it's like so awareness, so cool, feeding like the statistics and the data to organizations, helping them become aware of like, okay, these biases happen. They come from a visual perspective. We as humans, we have visual biases, we have auditory biases, we have biases, right? So helping them understand like this is innate, like it just happens. So helping them first understand that, and then what are the techniques then to help overcome them, right? And so for us, like a simple technique, and it's easy for me, but I'm like, close your eyes, like actually listen to a candidate, like if you're over the phone, like you think like, whoa, I'm not looking at them. No. You're going out there and you're looking at their LinkedIn profile, you're looking at their picture, you're creating those images in your head. Truly listen to what is being said. Close your eyes and listen. And so giving a technique of just focusing on the words that are being said and not putting any imagery around it. So we really focus on helping organizations understand that in particular, like giving them, okay, there's the what, but then there's the how. So for us, it's always the how. And so I love the technique, Nina, that you're sharing with like how you can do this. It's tactical. Like you pay people for their time. Well, you can also close your eyes. Close your eyes. Tactical, things that you can do that you can implement immediately.
Well, and I think that runs into what Nina, you talked about training.
Yeah, absolutely.
Critical. Like you're right. Nobody is ever born into training, but we're certainly born into bias, and that, like Mike said, is very innate, very natural. It's just how we are. We're human.
Right.
Doesn't mean we're bad people. Most of the time, it's based on how we grew up, all those things, right? And so I think training.
Yeah, and I think people just need to walk away from these interviews feeling valued. And closing your eyes, that's one great way to do it because it shows, it shows, the body language could come off as like, I'm not listening to you at all, I'm just going to go to sleep, but I get what you're trying to say.
You're setting it up,
by saying I'm an active listener.
Yes, and you set it up with that kind of language. Like for me, it's easy because I've got the cane or the service animal, right? So it's easy for me to say that. However, so the CEO of Oppenheimer, fairly important role, right? Like has his one-on-ones with his eyes closed. And so if you've never experienced that before, and he doesn't necessarily like say, hey, I'm doing this because I'm going to actively listen, because guess what? He's the CEO. He can do whatever he wants. However, so you from a training perspective, you train teams like, hey guys, just letting you know, like we know that there's actual science behind this technique, and what we're going to do is like we want to truly focus on active listening, right? So we don't want any visual distraction. So there are going to be times where my eyes are closed, I'm focused, but I'm absolutely focusing on the words. So you preface it, right? So it's not just
You don't just close your eyes and
Just lean back in your chair, put a blindfold on.
Sorry about the drool too. Sorry about the drool.
No, I was actively listening. I swear. That's what active listening looks like.
Well, it's funny.
I'm sorry, Mom. I was like, wait. Where's my meatloaf? Yeah. So.
Well, and I love that because that, to my point earlier about a lot of this technology out there that's trying to remove bias from the process by like taking the candidate's name off of their resume, right, for the pre-screen process. The problem I have with that, which I don't have a problem with the active listening part because that's the human to human interaction. But with the technology removing that, you're essentially removing what makes us all different. Like companies, the biggest way you're going to build an inclusive workplace is everybody has to be curious and appreciate the differences in each other and the differences that people with crazy names or from different countries or whatever can bring to the table. And that's why my problem with a lot of removing of bias from a technology standpoint is just without the training there, you're not creating an inclusive place. And then I have my own issues with diversity initiatives too. It's like, well, we're only going to hire women.
Yeah, that's for another episode too.
Yeah, boy.
Just talking about how do you implement a diversity initiative? What does that mean? And what's performative versus what's actually meaningful? And so that's a topic for another show.
Absolutely.
Wow, we got 2 topics already, guys.
I know.
It's going to be a season here of episodes soon. You're welcome, audience. Well, how do we feel about this conversation? What else? Are we missing anything? I mean, obviously, check out the website for links to different resources and other things, different opportunities for training. But what are any last words for this fine episode?
For me, it's just recognizing like technology isn't the end goal. It's a piece of the overall solution, and knowing that this is an iterative process, and you can do things that were already mentioned to immediately make an impact on your inclusive hiring practices.
Yeah, I would say that these are humans. These are people that are involved in interviewing, and the interviewers have their biases, and the people who are coming in with certain assumptions. So, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that people feel valued and heard. So what are you doing in your interview process to make sure that's the case?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yeah, something you said just sparked something that I try to help companies understand too is, it's not just the bias on your part as an organization looking to hire someone. It's always good to recognize that the candidates coming in also have their biases, right? And a candidate walking in, may feel that based on their skin color, based on their orientation, whatever it is, based on their name even, that the interviewer is already going to have judged them. So how do you create a process that, does value and makes that be more of a safe and vulnerable interaction? Because frankly, you're going to have more people that you don't hire that are going to go out there and talk about your company.
Yeah.
So how do you want them to talk about your company?
Awesome.
Cool.
I think those are pretty good tips to
Yes.
walk away with.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll see you next time, everybody.